everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are connecting from today. Thank you so much for being part of this community, Hacking HR. And this month of November, as you probably know by now, is Movember, is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And actually, yesterday, Sunday, the 19th, November the 19th, it was International Men's Day. And over the past few weeks, pretty much since the beginning of the month, in this Hacking HR community, we have been sharing a lot of resources related to men's mental health. As you know, um, death by suicide, substance abuse, depression rates, looking for support, overwhelmingly and negatively impacts men more significant than women in the world and, of course, in the workplace as well. And we put together this conversation for November or Movember to discuss all things pertaining to men's mental health. And we're going to have a great agenda over the next couple of days. It's going to be a quick round of sessions. All the events that we put together in this community are generally about an hour long each session, each panel. This time it's going to be 20 minutes each one, so it's going to be pretty quick. We just wanted you, if you're a man, we wanted you to, number one, to be encouraged, to be supported, to be loved by all this community that we created. And for everybody else, and including men, but for everybody, we also wanted you to walk away with some actionable insights, ideas, recommendations, resources that you may use not only for yourself, but also if you are trying to support other people and their mental health in the workplace, particularly men, as we celebrate this Movember, Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. So we're going to have 7 conversations, I'm sorry, over the next couple of days. Now we're going to be talking about redefining strength, embracing vulnerability in masculinity. The next session after this one is going to be shattering silence, overcoming the stigma of men's mental health. Then we're going to be talking about beyond the brave phase, understanding anxiety in men. Tomorrow, we have 4 amazing conversations as well, from isolation to connection, building supportive male communities, safe spaces in life and work, fostering safe spaces for men's emotional well-being, redefining the code, dismantling toxic masculinity. That's tomorrow. And finally, we're going to be wrapping up the day tomorrow with a conversation about mindful workplaces, nurturing men's mental health in the workplace. So we have a lot of great conversations going on. If you're connected live right now, please let us know where you are connecting from in the world. It would be awesome to read everybody. Just post it in the chat. If you have any questions, any comments, anything that you want to share with me or the community, please make sure that you post it on the chat. So just let us know where you're connecting from. So anyway, I want to welcome Paco to the screen. This first conversation is going to be the two of us, and then we have some panels the rest of the day. So Paco, welcoming you to the screen right now. Good morning, brother. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much. And again, I admire you and the rest of the Hacking HR team a lot. You're all putting together the right conversations at the right time. So thank you for doing this for the community.
Thank you, Paco. And it's exciting to talk with you because just by coincidence, you and I, the only ones in this first session, you and I are both Hispanic or Hispanics. You and I come from a culture where, the macho kind of culture where men don't cry because that's weak, or men don't show, their true emotions because that's a sign, once again, of weakness. So, in our own culture, the way we think about men and men's vulnerability and men's emotions and men's feelings is kind of unique, so to speak, right? So this conversation is really relevant. We're going to be talking now about embracing vulnerability in masculinity, knowing that we come from a culture where, in the past, that may not have been allowed. Maybe now there's more of an awakening of how important this of how important this is. But I think you and I are probably about the same age, and in our sort of upbringing, I don't think vulnerability was even a word. So let's begin here. I would love for you to introduce yourself to our audience and tell us more what vulnerability means for you as a nature leader, as a father, as a Hispanic man, and as a man in general. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Enrique. Well, born and raised in Mexico, Mexico City, and now I live in the Houston area in the U.S. I have a couple of decades in people and culture leadership experience in working in large, medium, and small companies and startups. And right now I'm advising multiple companies in different people and culture topics, and also starting to advise as well in this type of topics, including mental health and vulnerability, which I think are just so important. So vulnerability for me and how I experienced it, or the lack of experience, is interesting because there's a lot of intersectionality as we talk about this. So let's start by being in HR. So when you're in HR, independent of gender or any other thing, normally we need to be the function that holds emotions out, that has, very strict sense of psychological safety and psychological strength. And we just have to be in all of this human stuff that nobody in the business normally wants to be. And we always have to have a smiley face and keep our emotions in check and things like that. So when we start talking about vulnerability, particularly in a function like ours, it's so important because, it's funny sometimes when you talk to your HR colleagues, it's like, well, now finally I can be vulnerable a little bit in a corporate environment, right? So growing in that. Now, it's not the only function that has to go through it. I guess everybody that goes through a corporate environment to a point has to kind of separate significantly their feelings and how they really are versus their work persona, right? So I think that coming again as a raised as a Hispanic Catholic man, and for many different reasons, including father, grandfather, and all of those sort of things, I was always in the perception that I had to be, at the top of my game, never cry, always be tough, shark eat shark. My father, rest in peace. He was in the he was an investment banker, and he told me that at least in whatever he was dealing with, the only way to win in a corporate environment, again, was shark eat shark. You always had to be tougher than the other guy, never show any vulnerability, never show any emotion, always be at the top of your game. And that's my interpretation of what he told me. We all make these stories about stuff. Now that I've been reflecting more about it, maybe he told me a little bit of that, but it's always good to add drama because we love drama as humans, right? So I guess trying to summarize that, in my view, we all have all of this macho stuff surrounding us everywhere in the world. And I'm sure individuals in the chat will always tell us too. I mean, I'm sure they all have experienced a different situation like this, but probably very similar. And in a lot of other countries and situations and cultures, there's still a lot of repression going on. There's still a lot of, individuals, just because of culture, religion, or whatever you want, they just can't speak about the real stuff. And I'm on a journey of changing that. And it's difficult. It's very, very difficult because the moment that you go into vulnerable mode, it's just fascinating what happens. On one side, there's a lot of people that are so happy that someone is, willing to be courageous and raise the hand and saying, you know what, I feel like you. But then there's this other set of people that either consciously or unconsciously want to punish you for doing that because they want to stick to the old way of doing things. So trying to be a little bit of going to navigate that, it's a tough thing. For sure.
And you're making me think about all this idea or concept of the culture wars, right, or the culture war, where the exactly what you're saying, you can see it every day
Okay.
play out on social media, for example. Men saying toxic masculinity is a thing, and it's very negative, not only for society, it's negative for the actual person
Mhm.
who is that toxic man, or embracing the traits of toxic masculinity,
Mhm.
and trying to be more open, and trying to be more vulnerable, and trying to embrace their full humanity.
Mhm.
And on the other hand, you see people saying that's not what men do. Men are supposed to be stern, and men are supposed to be, to, like you said before, never cry or show emotions. That's a sign of weakness, and that's not our place in society.
Mhm.
And the reality is that what this second group of people are doing is pretty much telling people, yeah, stick to the old ways, but because it may have paid off for us, for a
Mhm.
long time. What
Mhm.
they are not telling people is that way is unsustainable. It's
Mhm.
unsustainable for you to not to think that you have to be on top of your game 80 hours a week. In a year from now, you're going to be burned out. It's
Mhm.
unsustainable to think that you can't show your emotions, that you can't be vulnerable. I mean, I'm not saying that you go to the workplace and cry in front of everybody. I'm just saying that if you have a friend, you just, or just making friends, even that, reaching out to people, that already is hard, right? Because there's a barrier, in between men, preventing them from, building those meaningful relationships. So it is really hard. And not surprisingly, you look at the data and the statistics of how men are more overwhelmingly affected by, again, isolation, depression, stress, death by suicide, substance abuse as the way out, as the outlet to, bottling all up inside, right? So how do we think about a workplace? Because we can think about life when I ask these questions, but I want to make sure that the audience walks away with some insights, right? How do we build a workplace that allows men to do that? Where do we even start? And I ask you this question, Paco, because I am sure that both men and women listening to this conversation right now, or watching this conversation right now, they are probably nodding along saying like, oh yeah, that's all right. But the question is the gap between nodding along and saying, yes, I agree with all of what you're saying, and actually making changes in the workplace that allow men, if not to cry in front of others, at least to build a community of support in the workplace. How do we do that? Where do we begin this journey?
Oh my God, that's such a profound
That's a,
question.
that's a big question, right?
That's a little bit like what's the meaning of life? No, I love it. I think it's very thought provoking, and I also have been reading a little bit of the comments in the chat, and I think they're so true. And thank you, for example, Jodine and others to be vulnerable and open up of their personal experience. Um, well, I hate to be a broken record, but it has to start at the top.
Yeah.
And sometimes it starts with having a very deep and direct conversation with either the CEO and or the individuals that pull the strings in the company. That
Mm.
sometimes it's not the CEO, sometimes it's the most opinionated individuals in the country, in the
Yeah.
company, which, by the way, sometimes are women,
Yeah.
right? So it's both men and women.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting sometimes how those dynamics are. Sometimes, it could be because of the upbringing of the individuals that lead the company, leads them to have very specific belief systems that go significantly against this, and then land in the unconscious bias side. So I would say having the courage, which is difficult because sometimes your job could be at jeopardy, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Having the courage to start to having open conversations about how could we change the paradigm? What is the problem we're trying to solve? I've had the unique opportunity to be in a couple of leadership teams where we started having those discussions. And sometimes, again, it started just with the top leader. Sometimes it's exactly the opposite. Sometimes it's, bottoms up, and you start having conversations with others. But one of the biggest problems that I think happens to all of us is if we look at the problem as a big thing, it's very overwhelming.
Yeah.
And then it's so overwhelming that we just don't do anything. We get into
Yeah.
procrastination.
Mhm.
One of my favorite movies, The Power of One, talks about that a whole waterfall starts with a single drop of water. So if you look at it that way and follow that trend, sometimes, actually, most of the times, I think in any of these substantial changes, starts with a small thing.
Yeah.
Example, you could influence the leader of the company in Movember, if they are an individual that identifies as a man, to go and just open up a little bit in an all hands meeting, sending a Slack message, sending an email to everyone else, just acknowledging a little bit what it means to them to be in a month like Movember. Why am I saying that? It's because it's very easy to hide behind the corporate talking points.
Mhm.
That's a easy path. And
Yeah.
by the way, people are now way. I mean, it's very easy for us to think that we can fool people with talking points. We cannot fool people with talking points anymore.
Yeah.
That's gone.
Yeah.
We cannot assume that people are not reading and being connected in a lot of different things. So it has to come from a genuine side. And again, it might not be for a person to write a whole manifesto and just open up, all of their childhood issues. It could just really be as simple as saying, Movember is important to me, and here's an example of why it's important to me.
Yeah.
And it could be as easy as, sometimes I have struggled with my mental health and I went to our therapist.
Yeah.
It could be as easy
Yeah.
as saying,
Yeah.
sometimes when I finish work, I have all of these sort of things and I have to go and work out to get some of those things out instead of taking that with my family. Like there's so many different ways. I meditate or whatever that is, right? So I think it starts with the smaller things. Of course, there's much bigger things like creating different resource groups or employee communities or whatever you want to call that associated with mental health.
Yeah.
It could be for the leaders of the company to go deeper if you happen to be in a company that does offer mental health benefits, which a lot of companies are now doing it, and just sharing that they might have utilized one of those.
Yeah.
Or again, opening up as men, particularly macho men, but in all of the companies, it's the same, all of the cultures, the same thing. How often do you talk to a man that says that they have a therapist?
Yeah.
It's like,
Re-
no, how can you do it,
Rarely.
right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that
Even
is just,
even if you have it, the act of saying that you have it sometimes already, well, first, if you do it, you already are showing some courage, right? I mean, just to say that you actually have a therapist.
yes.
And but most of the times, at least, some folks that I know, they prefer to keep that, under the hood, just because, it, again, it shows up as a quote unquote sign of weakness when it's not.
Yes.
It's not. And I want to encourage everybody here, it's not a sign of weakness to find help, especially professional help. But for some reason, most likely it's a cultural reason, we think that asking for help, talking to people,
Yes.
it's just wrong, and it's not.
I love how you're taking this. And again, reading the chat, I love the chat in this. By the
Yeah.
way, keep connecting folks in the chat. I love it. It's funny because now finally we're starting to talk about different types of intelligence. We're also starting to talk about different types of health.
Yeah.
And when you talk about, now a lot of people are, oh yeah, I'm doing all of these things and tracking my steps and my sleep and all that stuff. That's good. That's physical health. Uh, but mental health is equally as important. And again, I think
Yeah.
instead of going and work out, your mind and your psyche also has to work out so you can have psychological
Mm.
strength. That is a significantly important topic to have a conversation about. And again, all of
Yeah.
us just don't do that. And that's why now,
Yeah.
I mean, go Google it. There's so many studies now that link bad psychological health to real bad physical health, cancers and
Yeah.
whatnot. I mean, it's true. It's real and it happens. So how do you continue to open up? Let me tell you a super quick anecdote that is one of my favorites, and I use it from time to time. I was on a very well-established company that was very famous because they never recruited anyone from the outside, never, always
Mm.
from within. So we did hire someone from the outside. So as you can imagine, just by that, it was very disruptive. People were very skeptical and whatnot. On top of that, this person decides to come in the very first day, sends an email to, I don't know, 5,000 people or something, and says, I'm very happy to be here, but let me tell you, I am terrified. I'm very scared because this is such a big company. It has such an incredible culture, and I'm new to it. So I need all of your help to help me get through this.
Yeah.
That was a bold move from this person,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Particularly in a company that at that point in time, you had to always, as a CEO, you always had to portray yourself as I'm the perfect, CEO. I can tell you that has been the best corporate move I've seen probably in my whole career. Why? Because he automatically went into vulnerable mode. And
Yeah.
guess what? A lot of people start to get into vulnerable mode just by
Yeah.
an email.
Yeah.
Okay. So I truly believe so. It
Yeah.
does take a little bit or a lot of guts to go and do it. But I'm not telling you all to automatically just go and send that email, just by doing it.
Yeah.
We have to think about it. But, start with, if you have a team, start with your team and
Yeah.
sometimes have vulnerable Mondays. If now, this is important though. I am a little bit extreme sometimes, and with some of my teams, I've gone vulnerable too fast because I'm very flexible and very quick to grasp those things. Particularly with a couple of individuals, given their very strong roots and given how conservative they were, etc. They privately told me that I went too far,
Yeah.
too fast, which is okay. I had a good discussion, and they told me, "You're pushing me to be vulnerable. I don't want to. Give me
Yeah.
my give me my space." Okay,
Yes, please, yeah.
So don't overly push everybody because everybody has different levels of understanding, awareness, and different points in the journey. But if you can start with yourself by being vulnerable, that's one thing that I always do in these panels. I always share at least one thing from my life, from a vulnerability standpoint. At the beginning, trust me, it was very difficult because I
Yeah.
go, oh, this is so risky. Now it's not risky. You're
Yeah.
actually being more real, more human, and people will actually like you more because
Yeah.
you're more real and you're less plastic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's about acceptance, right? And
Yes.
and I am thinking how most corporate cultures perhaps have been built exactly on the opposite idea of some of these trends that we're seeing now. Now we're talking about vulnerability when in the past it was, the strong man CEO, like having it all figured out, having all the answers to every problem in the world. And now we are embracing a whole set of, very different behaviors and actions and ideas. And it may take time, for some organizations to embrace, vulnerability and to celebrate when people, particularly men, are vulnerable in the workplace. What I do, sort of find empowering is when you have somebody at such a high level as a CEO or somebody in the C-suite saying, this is what's happening to me. It doesn't mean that automatically everybody will be like, oh, they are vulnerable, I can be vulnerable too, because that's not an automated step from one stage, from one to the other, right? But it means that people feel a little bit more empowered and encouraged, to be vulnerable, and that's powerful. Paco, as we wrap up our conversation and get ready for our next chat here, I want to ask you one last question. Your message directly to men, and I'm not talking about leaders. I'm not talking about CEOs. I'm not talking about somebody in their capacity as an employee. Just men. Um, one message that you want to send them about the benefit of being vulnerable, if not with the whole world, at least with the one person that they love, that they care for, that cares for them. One benefit of them being vulnerable in terms of their own health, mental health, and well-being. One message that you want to send men.
The one-liner is "You're not alone."
Mm.
A little bit deeper explanation is that if you're experiencing this, billions of people are experiencing the same thing as you. Now, again, from overwhelming to action, I think the number one point is just think go into reflection mode a little bit, and just think about, where do you think you need to be a little bit more vulnerable on? Uh, and who do you think you can be a little bit more vulnerable with? And
Yeah.
sometimes, and most of the times, it starts with a person that sleeps with you, or a
Yeah.
person that is in front of you, right? We so just push yourself a little bit today. I'm not
Yeah.
telling you going to, to the world, and no. Just start with something small. It's exactly the same thing as going to a diet or going to a gym. If you want to
Yeah.
go all in on a diet, most people just don't do it. It's exactly the same thing. Think a little bit about what is one small step that you can take today towards vulnerability, where it could be asking new questions, where it could be exposing yourself a little bit. Some of you say in the panel, if I do this at work, they're going to fire me or I'm going to lose. Okay. Don't do that. But if there's, I'm sure there's sore places. And by the way, if there's not any of those, trust me, you just need to open up your mindset a little bit more. And there could be other communities that you're not leveraging.
Yeah.
There are support communities everywhere in the world for this. Just
Yeah.
be a little bit more curious.
Yeah. I like that, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate the call to action. Once again, talking about mental health, men's mental health, there is of course a call to action to the corporate world. There is a call to action to senior leaders. There's a call to action to HR, and evidently there is a call to action to those of us individually who uh, there's something that we can there are things that we can do, right? And we already have that friend that we may not want to share our entire lives with necessarily, but maybe if we are struggling with something at work, just the one thing, right? I mean, like, I'm overwhelmed because I have all these projects and I don't know what to do. Just having somebody say, like, oh, let's go for a beer, and make you forget about work for one night. Just the one thing, man, that requires that level of vulnerability. That's just that one thing can make a difference in somebody's lives. So, Paco, thank you so much for joining me today, sharing your insights. Everybody who's connected online, I'm going to let Paco go right now. Thank you, Paco. You have a wonderful day, and continue, embracing vulnerability, and showing us the path of what happens when we become vulnerable, particularly as men, which is what we're talking about in this conversation. So you, my friend, have a wonderful day. I'm going to let you go now.
Thanks.
Thank you. And everybody who's connected online right now, we're going to go to our next conversation right now. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, we have 7 conversations, which are going to be very short over the next couple of days, today and tomorrow. And all of them are focused on this month of Movember. So it's not November, it's Movember, which is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And today is Monday, the 20th of November. But yesterday, the 19th, it was International Men's Day. And of course, for those of us men, International Men's Day and November have both become a celebration of men's mental health, but also a very urgent call to action, considering the severe impact of men's mental health in things such as substance abuse, or death by suicides, or the many other data points that we discussed earlier today. So please continue sharing in the chat anything that you want to share about this month, any questions that you may have. And this next panel and this next conversation will be about, the name is Shattering Silence, Overcoming the Stigma of Men's Mental Health. And I saw some of you were talking about stigma in the chat. So I'm hoping that you, of course, bring up some of these, some of your questions and comments to the conversation. So I'm going to ask all our panelists to please turn on your cameras if you don't have them on right now, so that we can kick off this conversation. So I'm welcoming everybody to the screen right now. So get ready. You're coming to the screen. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is in the world that you are today. I'm going to ask you a favor as we kick off this conversation. If you can have your microphones muted when you are not speaking, that way we can reduce background noise as much as possible. So Uh, by just sheer good fortune, this panel will be a little longer than the 20 minutes that I had saved for all the other sessions. So thank you so much for the flexibility to extend sort of the timing of our conversation about overcoming the stigma of men's mental health. And what I want to do is I'm going to ask you a question, and please just raise your hand. Well, virtually, meaning just go ahead and unmute yourself and just say whatever you want to say. What I'm going to ask you is to please introduce yourselves, and I want to ask you this question to kick us off. In addition to introducing yourself, and my question is this: how can we, probably this is the question that we're going to spend all the time on, but how can we build a workplace where there's no stigma on things related to mental health? And I know this question alone will probably take us the next half an hour, but what do we need to do to build a workplace where we can remove the stigma that we know exists? There's no workplace where there's no stigma around mental health, but how can we shatter the stigma? How can we break it and build a workplace where people are open about their own mental health? So if you can get very tactical with this question, that would be awesome, because then we can make sure that our audience walks away with some clear, actionable items that they can start implementing in their workplaces. So please introduce yourself and let us know how can we build a workplace where we can shatter stigma around mental health, and particularly, of course, around men's mental health. So please, anybody, unmute yourself. We start from you, whoever it is, and then we move clockwise from there. Anybody, please just go ahead. Don't be shy. You're all veterans of this of the hacking HR panels. Nicole, please go ahead.
Hello, hi, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone. I know like there are a lot of people from everywhere. I'm living in Singapore, so it's good morning. It's like around midnight to me. So I'm Nicole. I'm the director of HR and corporate communications for McCann World Group Singapore and Hong Kong. It's an advertising agency. And I am like a big advocate of mental health because I've also gone through and overcame my own mental health battles in the past. But I think like going back to your question, Enrique, you were asking like how do we remove the stigma on mental health. To be honest, it's not an overnight thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of changes in the culture, but like similar to what you were talking about with Paco earlier, the first step is really to create an environment where it's open to have conversations around mental health. Like for me, like in my work in HR, like in the Asian culture especially, it's not common for like men in the workplace to go to you and say, hey Nicole, like I'm having a depression or I feel like I'm having mental health issues. That's not a thing. And like the only way that I'm able to catch it is when I have like my own observations. Like, you don't need to pry on people's lives, but
Mhm.
it's more of trying to see if there are symptoms or possible symptoms of mental health issues or challenges in the workplace. May it be changes in their behavior of the people, and then like when I would catch that, I would either schedule a one-on-one with these people or their managers even, to see what's going on, or like even like during lunch breaks have very casual conversations on that would allow them to open up about what they're feeling, to make them feel that their emotions are also valid.
Yeah.
So I think it's you start with that, like having a safe space where you're okay to talk about what you feel without being judged or without
Mhm.
feeling that you'll be seen as a weakling in the organization.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you, Nicole. And thank you for reminding us that this is not an overnight thing. We don't change workplaces overnight in any direction. Doesn't matter which one it is. And of course, right now we're talking about the one that is the proper direction about focusing on men's on people mental health, particularly men's mental health. But it's reassuring because we know that there's an urgent case to focus on people's mental health, but we won't be able to, cover the sun with, just one finger. We have to start slowly and with actions that people feel, hey, I'm feeling the difference just with this one little thing. So I appreciate you, sharing that sobering and grounding message to our community. So thank you, Nicole, and welcome to the panel. May, we move on next to you. Hi.
Hi, good evening from Nairobi. Trust you all very well, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are logged in across the world. My name is May Nyaga. I'm the head of human capital at Faulu Microfinance Bank, and it's a member of Old Mutual East Africa Limited. Um, this conversation comes out live because of the current engagements that we are having at the bank. I do work in a microfinance bank, and one of the things that we've realized is that over time, we needed to update our policies. So we used to focus on physical health, club membership, ensuring staff are going on leave, and more than ever, just like the way I was listening to Nicole and Paco say, we need to also prioritize on the mental health. And one of the things that human capital we have to do is um, break those stigma and break those society expectations that have been set. And at
Mhm.
the bank, we did create a man cave. It's called Faulu Man Cave. Man cave is a forum where the men come and have session as men. As Nicole said, it was not easy. By the time you have the first person speaking up, it was a challenge. It's like it took an hour. And remember, there was no lady there or any female colleague. So we had to get an external facilitator who is a doctor to be able to break the
Mhm.
ice, because remember, he's an independent person and not person who is internally, to break the ice and to have start having open conversations. And creating that environment as HR is very important, where you let the men be. um, Remember, we've come also from society, like Nicole has said, men are these macho men, they are supermen, they're
Mhm.
supposed to know it all. But as you become, like the way I became a certified coach, I realized also they don't have all the answers. Like the way coaches, you're taught like you don't have the answer, the person with the question has the answer. So creating that environment, creating an environment of openness, creating an environment that slowly is diminishing the judgmental way of how men show up, will be able to focus on the mental health at the workplace. And this has slowly helped us create initiatives like anonymous calls, counseling calls, where men can reach out without necessarily getting to know who is on the other side, but with a psychiatrist. Because at the end of the day, you have to protect their self-esteem, you have to protect their being, because
Mhm.
remember, men don't show up, don't talk about what they're going through. In the
Mhm.
Kenyan side, Nairobi side, we have this element where when the men have issues, they go out to the drink with the boys and they discuss, and they tell the boys tell him, or tell him and tell him, don't worry, everything will be okay. But at the end of the day, he's looking for solutions, he's looking for ways on how to handle whatever is going through. And drinking actually accelerates the problem, because more you continue drinking, the more you continue thinking the problem is being worked up, because you get into this aura of happiness, instant gratification from the drink. But at the end of the day, this issue is not sorted out. So, given that we do spend a lot of time at the workplace, so at Human Capital, we have come up with initiatives that are supporting the men at the workplace. And one of them is the man cave, where they go to a cave as men, has really brought uh, a lot of positive ways in terms of how we are embracing men at work. Thank you.
Thank you, May. And I appreciate you bringing the fact that, yes, the way we think we're solving the problems that we have with uh, whatever is affecting our mental health. In the case of men, generally, the outlet is getting together with the boys and drinking, right? And first of all, when that happens, and this is science, by the way, we're not even making it up and just inventing something here. It's there's data research showing that, number one, in those conversations, you never talk about what's really happening. You end up talking about whatever else, but not what's really happening. So you end up not talking about what's happening, not talking about the problem, not finding solutions to whatever is happening, but you're actually drinking and finding yourself in that cycle over and over again, which, by the way, not surprisingly, results in men overwhelmingly abusing substances like drugs or alcohol as an outlet for whatever is happening with mental health. Number one, because we generally don't talk about what's happening, but when we talk about something along the lines of whatever may be happening, it's never the actual issue, and we never get solutions. It's just a social thing, right? So what you talked about, it actually has been, thoroughly researched over and over again, and we know the data. So thank you, May, and welcome to the panel. Rancy, we move on next to you.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm joining you guys from Dubai. My name is Renzi. I am the founder and managing director of Key People. It's an employee experience consulting agency, and we design happy workplaces. So on your question, Enrique, and I'm going to echo what also Nicole has mentioned earlier, that you cannot do things overnight. Because the way I see not just mental health for men, but mental health in general, it is actually a roadmap, and it's a never-ending roadmap for a lot of organizations, which starts with an awareness. So when you talk about all these awareness activities, you can do campaigns with your internal communications team, put it out there. What is mental health? Like, give stories on what's happening, give statistics, give data. If you don't look after one's mental health, what will happen? So tell them everything about what mental health is. And I think for me, the biggest thing that people don't know when you talk about mental health, people think mental health in itself, these two words, are actually negative. But in reality, just like physical health, mental health does not mean anything unless you are diagnosed by a clinical psychiatrist who tells you, okay, or a GP who will tell you, listen, I think you need to see a psychiatrist and this is what's happening. So people also, from awareness, we move to education. So education will also not only just create that awareness, but will also deepen people's understanding of what exactly is mental health. This is where also the power of enabling managers with tools and resources. Nicole mentioned something about, like, as an HR professional, she's able to identify some of the signs and symptoms. Imagine if you don't confine that only with HR. Imagine if you enable your managers by letting them know, okay, guys, these are the most common mental health illnesses. These are the common signs and symptoms. We're not teaching them how to diagnose, but at least if they can spot what are these typical signs and symptoms, then they can start having that conversation. So you have that education piece, which should happen all throughout the organization, from C-level all the way down. And then you obviously have to operationalize that. When you operationalize that, you need to create an ecosystem where you have a support group who are well trained on how to support people internally, just as a confidant or people they want to speak to. But at the same time, which is becoming more and more common now, at least here in the region where I'm operating, is employee assistance programs, where they really partner with clinics, or maybe some of their medical insurance providers offer now also a plethora of resources around mental health. And then also relooking at your policies. Because oftentimes people think that, like, oh yeah, I've done this initiative, I've created an EAP program, I've created awareness, but that's it. But actually, sometimes the fundamental problem in organizations are the policies and processes, which actually limit people from really opening up because of repercussions, because these are not covered by your general rules and regulations within the organization. And I think that the most important thing also, like for us as HR, is really to create that environment where it's encouraging people to feel it's okay to share things. I think Paco was sharing something earlier about vulnerability. I think it has to come down also from the senior leaders. So like people who are influential in organizations, the more we can put them out there front and center, speaking about this, that people, it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to accept that this is what's happening. Then I think we will see more and more people, especially men, coming forward seeking help. whether it's in strict confidentiality or maybe just working with their team members or working with people who are highly trained in organization. I think, again, in summary, I think it's basically a roadmap of how do you break that stigma, not overnight, but it's also not 1 month, it's not only 1 year, it could be a journey for organizations.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Rancy, and I'm hoping that we can unpack several of the elements that you just talked about. Uh, for two reasons, of course. Number one, to encourage men to be breaking the stigma of mental health in the workplace themselves, of course, but at the same time for a more corporate approach to breaking that stigma. So we're hopefully going to get there. Taylor, and last we're gonna go to Gisani.
Hello, and thank you, Enrique, for having us on, and thank you, Hackett HR. My name is Taylor Bradley. I am the head of HR Business Partners and Compensation at Turing. And prior to my career in HR, I was a firefighter paramedic. And so very much ties into seeing firsthand what we've all been discussing today. And in my clinical experience, when I was a paramedic, I had found that mental health is not a gendered issue. It's a human issue. It's a human problem. And way too often have I seen too late. And it's important to recognize that many of these things can be temporary, but also some can be disease processes. And there's a couple things that on a tactical level, it's important for us as HR practitioners to recognize. When I was a paramedic, one of the key things that we always had to remember is that although we were clinicians, we were not doctors. And the outcome that we had to provide to our patients was getting them to what we would call definitive care. So we needed to connect that patient and transport them to someone that could solve the underlying issue. And as HR practitioners, it is second nature for us to listen, to want to be involved. But we have to also just as important, recognize the line and that you are not a clinician, and that some of the mental health issues that our team members are facing need to have definitive care, clinical care to resolve them. The second important piece is to recognize that privacy is essential. And it is important in all settings, no matter what the rules and regulations are, to recognize that there's some things that, yes, you should get them connected to definitive care, but also make sure that the information that you have been given is kept in the strictest confidence. Because although that person may trust you, it's important to recognize they may not have shared that part of their journey with other people. And you don't want to violate that trust unless you have a duty to do so. If someone has threatened to take their life or something along those lines. Finally, the topic that I think we'll get into today and that I'm most excited about is the tactical things. And one thing that I think is a huge opportunity for HR leaders is we sometimes get distracted about over policy or the bright and shiny new benefit to offer folks, but fail to execute on the basics. And there are so many things that we can do to influence our culture, to influence a healthy culture that don't require fancy benefits, extensive budget, but instead making sure people are effectively utilizing their paid time off. That is a free thing that you can do today in your business that will mitigate burnout, but more importantly, let people uncharge. So Enrique, I'm excited to dive into a bit more of the basics, but I'll go ahead and continue on so we can hear from some of our other panelists.
Thank you, Taylor. I appreciate it, and definitely I hope we get into some of the tactics that we can use in HR, knowing, like you said before, and I think I think all of the panelists said it too, that we are, unless we are a certified professional in mental health or a therapist or, a clinician or a psychologist, we can recognize some signs, and there are some things that we can do and some things we won't be able to do. But maybe the best thing that we can do is actually finding help with somebody that for whom the signs are obvious, that perhaps there's some support that is needed. So we're going to get there. Thank you, Taylor. And last in this first round, but not least, Giussani, please go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know, a couple of things that you have in mind about how we can shatter stigma in mental health stigma in the workplace.
Absolutely. Thanks, Enrico. And this is the challenge about going last with a group of talented panelists, because usually
Yeah.
all the golden nuggets have already been taken. But I think first off, I mean, Nicole, I think you started the panel off really great with your comment about it's not an overnight thing. We as a workforce, as well as a society, have to figure out, how do we normalize this? How do we normalize this so it's not a stigma? And so how do you normalize anything? You make it part of the everyday conversations. I've seen things at work where, there are small connection groups, maybe an affinity group, an ESG group or whatever, where you have champions. And, it's really powerful when a leader just casually says, well, yeah, I was talking to my therapist about, managing pressures, and everybody's like, what? Did this C-suite or did this powerful executive just say that they went, and you'd be surprised, like, once that happens, once someone who has either hierarchical legitimacy or just assumed legitimacy. There are some people, as we all know, don't have the title, but they really run the departments. But when one of those individuals just casually says, yeah, oh, I see a therapist all the time. Yeah, once a month. Just to deal with 2023, right? Just to kind of deal with what's going on. And you'd be surprised, just once that bottle is opened up, how people then feel the courage to raise their hand and say, yes, I too am struggling. And so, Taylor, you hit the nail on the head. It's not always about fancy policies and fancy benefits. Those things definitely help, having the structure, the infrastructure in place, but more of a grassroots, like in your own workplace. How is mental health as just a general topic? Let's take the gender out of it. How is mental health perceived in general? So when someone says, I need to take a mental health day, what is the immediate reaction to be leadership? Do they roll their eyes and say, oh, okay, all right, this is another high maintenance Gen Z thing, right? Or do they take it seriously? And it's interesting because we talk about, when we say normalization, so how do you do it? You start off with putting certain behaviors in check. And it's when you see it, it's not when the chairman or the CEO announces a brand new policy or a new initiative. It's what happens in the break room on Tuesday morning when people are getting coffee. Those are the things that really impact the day-to-day work. I overheard, and it's interesting. I overheard a couple of ladies, they were talking about a meeting that was coming up. And I was just in there. And of course, when HR walks in the room, I didn't even introduce myself. I just started talking, didn't I? VP of HR for the American Bureau of Shipping. So sorry. But when HR walks in the room, the conversations typically change. And I guess they didn't see me. And so they were talking about a meeting that was coming up. And they were saying, yeah, we got to make sure we stick with the agenda because we need to make sure we don't go off topic. And they were like, well, such and such. It was another leader in the room, another leader that they were talking about. They said, because he's only two syllables away from always bursting into tears. And them and like three other ladies next to them, they were joking and laughing. And it's just because this individual is he's not the alpha male, right? He's not that typical, type of individual. So we also have to figure out, like, when those things happen, say, hey, you guys, be careful with that, right? He may have some things going on. Don't rush to judgment. Those jokes are, those jokes you think are funny, further stigmatized when people do raise their hand for help. And I guess the last thing I'll mention is, policies do play a part into this as well, though. In the former life, I dealt with an issue where a male colleague of mine, and he is a very high level individual. He literally went through a bout of depression because, in the U.S., we're so far behind in terms of maternity and paternity laws and policies. We're the only, what you would consider first world country that doesn't have, at least 30 days of paternity and maternity leave automatic. We, if you're lucky, men take 2 or 3 days of vacation. when the birth of their child happens. And so this individual, he was depressed. He was, and I saw him in his office, and I knew he wasn't his normal giddy self. And I said, hey, what's going on? He says, man, I just feel like a freaking failure. I feel like a failure because my wife just gave birth to our first child. I took my 5 days of vacation, but I had to get back to work because we don't have that benefit in place. And I feel like, I know my wife, she has a lot going on. She just delivered a week ago, and I need to be home. I should be home with her, supporting her and being there with my child. But I have an obligation as the provider, the primary provider for the home. And I don't want to get sideways with my employer to say I need more time. And because he wasn't there, he felt all this pressure, which led into depression, which I'm glad some other people noticed to provide him the support he needed, because he was really feeling really sad about it. And I got his permission to tell this story because I knew we were going to get into it. But it goes from normalization through how are our behaviors day to day at work? Do we give our employees, again, not just men, just people in general, the freedom to raise their hand, or do we roll our eyes? And then, policies in place that allow people to have certain benefits so they don't even have to think about, do I challenge my job, or am I there for my wife and my newborn child? Because those are decisions that no employee should ever have to deal with. And you should never have to decide between those two factors. They should work harmoniously together. So I'm looking forward for the rest of the conversation as we dive more into this topic.
Thank you, Giussani. I appreciate your input and everybody else's as well. Of course, welcome all to the panel. And, I want to go back to you, Giussani, and then, all the questions that I'm going to be asking now are open to everybody, anybody who wants to just jump in and say something. But I'm going to start with you, Giussani, because you said something that it's really powerful, to be honest, and that we have been talking a lot about in the community, which is you don't build a great culture just because the CEO says you have to have a great culture, right? You don't build a culture of vulnerability because the CEO says you have to allow people to be vulnerable. You have to build psychological safety. You have to be creative, innovative, and blah blah blah. Even when they themselves are showcasing or embodying those behaviors they want to see in the organization, when you go down from there and you go to the coffee room, right, and the pantry room, and you hear two people saying, look, this person is like, he always seems that he's about to cry, then it doesn't matter what the CEO says if those are your two coworkers that you have to deal with every day. The CEO can say, we are an organization where we embrace vulnerability, but your own coworkers, the people that you deal with every day, are saying, this person, joking, out of you or making fun out of you because, you seem to be about to cry, not knowing exactly what's going on. So great culture, including all things mental health, is built by everyday, ordinary, extraordinary interactions between all the people in an organization. So let me now turn that into a question, right? How can all of us break our own stigma, the stigma that we have in our minds about what mental health really is, right? Because once again, the easiest path for those two coworkers that you saw in the pantry room was to just make fun of somebody who seemed to, be about to cry. But the path of more resistance, but the best path would have been, maybe we ask this person if he or she is okay. Maybe we offer a little bit of help because there's something seems off here, right? Like you said with your own coworker who was, a new dad. Something seems to be off. What can I do to understand what's going on? What can I do to maybe make it easier for that person to, do whatever they need to do to get out of this situation? So how can we build those sort of interactions, Giussani? Question for everybody. How can we remove our own internal personal stigma that we have in our minds that drive us to perhaps make fun of people, in those small conversations and whatnot?
I won't overcomplicate this, right? It's about the day-to-day interactions. It's really about what we do as individuals, what we do as departments, what do we do within the team structures. What is the normal dynamic when it comes to mental health? I think one of the panelists mentioned it earlier about educating ourselves on what mental health really is. It's not, if I raise my hand and say I need mental health, that means I'm crazy. Like, no, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not about that. It's about, we all have challenges. We all have struggles. Work-life balance is a challenge, even in the best working environments. We all have families. We all have, everything that goes on within our personal lives. And just because we walk into our office, our front doors of our office, our personal lives don't stop. So how do we set things up to make, make things psychologically safe to say, when I am struggling, how do I make sure that that the individuals who raise their hands aren't immediately labeled as troublemakers or high maintenance or weak or things like that, where vulnerability is celebrated, right? Yeah, where vulnerability, yeah, exactly, yeah, vulnerability is celebrated, not villainized. And so again, a statement from the CEO and the chairman is great. It sets the litmus test. It shows that senior leadership is behind it. I think that's the role of senior executives, is to show the example of what good looks like. But the day-to-day interactions of our workforce aren't dictated by what happens in the C-suite. It's dictated by what that frontline supervisor allows in those team meetings. It's based on what happens in the coffee room, what happens during happy hours, when people think they're off the clock. It's those things, and for us as HR professionals and as influencers, to not necessarily lay down a vigilant gauntlet and say, you're a horrible person for ever saying that, but it's saying, hey guys, that's not cool. I mean, it's just like for those of us who have tried launching DEI programs and trying to push those initiatives. It's not about making these massive statements that make people feel included or feel like they belong and have psychological safety. It's about those day-to-day interactions within our team structures that allow for people to feel like it's okay for me to raise we can raise our hand, and say that we have an issue, we have a challenge, and not be villainized or have your career be penalized because you've had the courage to raise your hand. And that's where HR really can provide that bit of benefit and support.
Yeah. Thank you, Giussani. And Taylor, I saw you unmuting yourself. You want to go ahead, say something?
Yeah.
And anybody, by the way, these questions, if you want to say something, please feel free to just unmute yourself and go ahead. Don't even wait for me.
Thank you. First, like a round of applause for Giussani, right? I think a lot of what he said really resonates with me. For one piece, a tactical piece for our HR leaders that are listening, to me, I always frame up the employee-employee relationship is symbiotic. So one success is intrinsically linked to the other between the employer and the employee. And an opportunity that I feel exists for HR leaders across the globe is that too often do executives look at what they see as these soft issues as not business related. But at the end of the day, what drives the business is your employees. So keeping that workforce healthy and investing in their mental health does lead to top and bottom line growth. And it's on us as people leaders to figure out what is the way to tell that data-driven story about how these types of issues and addressing them can lead to positive outcomes for the business. And if I can get an executive team bought into that and having them understand, okay, this is an investment that will yield dividends, fantastic, because then that's going to ensure the sustainability of the access to these types of benefits to our employees. And on a detailed level, one of the ways to look at that is addressing burnout. So what astonished me when I was a firefighter, I come to learn that one of the leading causes, and sometimes switches in between first and second place, of firefighter deaths in the United States are not related to trauma. They're not related to actual fire or exposure to it. Instead, it's stress-related injuries, primarily coronary artery disease that's exacerbated by stress. You could think stroke, you can think heart attack, things like that. It's the leading cause of on-the-job deaths for firefighters. And that blew my mind. So at the end of the day, creating a healthy, sustainable workforce comes to, we have to address this. And that was a big culture shift that occurred not in my parts, but many decades before I started and continues to evolve to this day, is how do we address burnout within this community? This is a community of men and women that do not like to step back and say, I need to recharge. So instead, you have to think of structurally, how do you set up an organization to ensure that happens, even when people don't? And in tech, I too often see burnout due to folks working just wild hours on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
And so I've intentionally made it a point to go to those executives or go to those individuals and say, I appreciate the hard work. I work incredibly hard myself because I want to also enjoy my life. And so those two typically go hand in hand. But if you burn out or you have a breakdown, then you're likely to be out weeks, months, maybe not even return. And so your value that you add to the business is put at risk by putting yourself on an unsustainable path.
Yeah.
And so again, there's a business case there. You going out and taking a week off to recharge your batteries enables you to come back and add more value to your career growth, right? And so those are the structural things that I think we should consider. And again, Jasani, applaud some of your points there that you just mentioned.
Thank you, Taylor. And by the way, Renzi, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
But no, I just want to build on what Taylor said. I like what he said there when it comes to burnout. Yes, burnout, which basically contributes and leads to ill mental health for a lot of people. And most of the time, it's usually the people who are high performers. High performers, because they're so passionate about what they do, they think the best way to get things done is to kill yourself until you realize you have heart palpitation, you have high blood pressure, a lot of these things, they think it's some sort of like physical illness, but a lot of these things can also be signs and symptoms of ill mental health. So going back to the point of Taylor, if we want to be tactical as HR as well, and I like what you said there, Taylor, about like really approaching your executives, as HR, we do that, but at the same time, we enable our managers by just having a simple conversation and integrating this conversation in their weekly team meeting to really understand not just a usual, how are you? Maybe to a certain extent, maybe do like on a scale of 1 to 10, where is your mental health now? How would you rate your overall well-being now? So like a different approach to how are you? And then if people say like, oh, I'm a 5, I'm a 6, 7. So we don't have to be 10 all the time. We don't have to be perfect all the time, but what would a good week look like for you? So if they say 7, 8, like, oh, what do you need from me as a manager? What do you need from me as HR? And how can I best support you? So by just having this non-stereotypical type of conversation in an organization, instead of your typical, how are you? Okay, let's move to the agenda. Let's get things done. Then maybe people will feel less intimidated, not just men in general, but people in general, less intimidated talking about mental health, because you're just understanding from them, how are you really today? And then how can we help each other?
And there's a component in there, Renzi, that I want to connect with something that Taylor said before, right? Number one, just the one question, right, can help somebody say, maybe not in the meeting, but offline with the boss, like, hey, I just had a baby, and my wife, she needs my help. Can I take a couple of days? I mean, we wish it was different in the US, but, we have to have those conversations offline sometimes because they are not in a policy, or it can be something else. But in addition to that, connecting to the business case that Taylor was talking about before, there's this component of, you can overwork me, for 6 months, but then I'm not going to come to work the following weeks just because I'm going to be burned out. So for the team, this amount of overwork is just unsustainable. So the long term will be much worse than if we did the right thing from now. Even empowering managers with that kind of knowledge. I'm not saying that they don't know that, but maybe they need more support from HR to connect the dots, right? If, the data that you can show them about people not coming to work because of burnout, for stress, for depression, how productivity and performance is decreased, and you connect these dots for them. Hopefully, that creates a different kind of incentive for them to say, well, maybe it's worth having this conversation. Maybe it's worth giving Taylor the, couple of days off he needs to just, go and, ride his bike or do whatever, he needs to do to just rest and recover and then come back and make this a sustainable operation in this team. But sometimes I find that not even those direct managers are actually empowered or have the ability to connect the dots that they may know exist, right? So, another important task for HR going on here. May and then Nicole.
All right, thank you. Very great conversations and engagements here. But one of the critical things is trust is earned. It's not bought. So we may have these flowery policies, procedures, structures, but if HR, we are not being authentic and not leading by example, then that means we are not creating the open room conversations to ensure that our staff are having these engagements. One of the things that I've seen over time, and we've been able to bring discussions of mental health being real, as Juzan mentioned, sorry if I did not mention your name properly, is that
Jasani, I just learned it.
having frequent conversations and engagement and awareness sessions on a month-to-month basis, having the themes slowly starts bringing everybody into the conversations. And especially remember, teams report to a line manager, supervisor, not the CEO. So empowering these line managers on how to have courageous conversation without necessarily having the judgment, is having the emotional intelligence and self-awareness that people are going through very many things, and therefore being judgmental. Somebody has to be self-aware that when you're having a conversation, you don't judge according to what you're being told or how you're listening. Remember, people are also coming out, have gone through traumas, different traumas at work, previous bosses at home, so many things, and especially right now post-COVID. So creating that environment, awareness sessions. But does my line manager listen to me? Do I trust them, or do I trust somebody else who can listen to me if I'm not very close to my line manager? And HR plays a role to ensure that their line managers are empowered on how to have the skills on people management skills, because some people are born as leaders, others grow into it, others have to be trained into it, but people do showcase different styles of leadership. So it's therefore important as HR to overtly and continuously communicating, sharing these insights, and being authentic and intentional to being there for the employees, not just pushing a policy because the CEO approved it, but because of the day-to-day work and the results are being seen with how people are showing up at work. Thank you.
Thank you, May. Nicole, I think you wanted to add something too.
So I think I want to discuss like 2 points. Also, like coming from what everybody was saying, I think number one, it's important for us to get to know our people and the business that we are handling. Like getting to know the people allows us to spot, like if they're burnt out, it allows us to spot symptoms. But at the same time, getting to know the business, what's going on in your company, on like the day-to-day operations. Of course, we wouldn't have the time to, really deep dive into the projects that our teams are going through, right? But at least at like on the bigger picture, like which months or which weeks are the busiest for the
Yeah.
team. Like I work in advertising, and you have all these horror stories on like advertising people don't sleep. And like to be fair, like with us, it's not all the time that it's like that. But when I would know that they would have pitches, if I would like find out that our teams will be staying in the office until like 10 p.m., sometimes I would stay on, and then I would tell them, can you put a hard stop at like say 10:30? Go home, like have like go to sleep, because like at this point you're probably exhausted already and you're not being productive. Or I would message their managers like, can you ask your teams to go home
Yeah.
already? Like, I would have those call outs. So like it's important for you to be aware of what's going on, for you to also be able to address the issues like on mental health, like like it's not even gender specific, right? But like, you know, like we have to be that aware. And I think like second thing is eliminating that bystander effect. I think like Jasani was like saying earlier, like, oh, like he just overheard these two ladies in their conversation, and he called it out. But not everyone would do that. So I
Yeah.
think we also have to build that culture wherein, like, regardless of what your position is, if you see something is wrong, when you see something is not right with the way people are treated, with the way people are being judged, you call it out.
Mm.
Like I think we shouldn't be scared. Like sometimes if I need to go against my CEO for what his perspectives are, or like his, you know, how he sees the people in the middle level of the organization, I would call it out, because that is like how you, I think, eliminate the root cause, like before it blows up, before it becomes a norm for people. We are already able to address it at like the onset stages.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you, Nicole. And as
Enrique,
you're, just on the please go ahead. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
real quick comment, and one thing I do want to I want to challenge with with some of our listeners. A lot of folks think that the stigma that we keep talking about the stigma, that the stigma comes from more guys, right? Guys with the machismo, the whole masculine
Mhm.
aspect, right? But studies show that men are much more responsive to the feedback of the women in their lives, in terms of what is considered masculine, or what's considered manly, or what's considered acceptable behavior for a man, right? And so one of the things I want to challenge folks is that like if you're be very conscious about how you talk about mental health. If you have young sons, right, or if you have if you're a sister or a mother, the words that you have on that man's psyche, or that young boy's psyche, or whomever, is extremely powerful. It's extremely powerful. It's more powerful than his buddies down the street. Yeah, peer pressure's a thing, in terms of how we, even as an adult guy, peer pressure is a thing in terms of how we think our peers view us. But I will tell you, the impression that my wife has of me is 10 times more powerful than my drinking buddy at work. And sometimes I have this mentality of what I think that she thinks that I should be. And that adds some undue pressure, because that inner critic that we all deal with as we go on and grow in our professions. But I did just want to throw that one bit in there, is just that if you are the special lady or mother or someone's life, do not underestimate the power of your words in terms of how that
Mm.
person, how people see that, in terms of how we view men's health in this modern age.
Thank you for that, Justani. I appreciate the encouragement and challenging, the women, or in the workplace, to continue to encourage men in a direction of taking care of their mental health. And we're getting closer to sort of the end of our conversation here, and can't believe that it's being, we barely kind of scratched the surface, right? I mean, there's so much to talk about in here. But I want to ask you this to sort of wrap up our conversation. And this is a question for everybody, so please make sure that share your insights. Everything is a journey, right? And I am thinking now, years back, when I'm on a journey, right? And I think it's a journey, hopefully, of improvement. And in that journey of improvement, that includes even the kind of words that I use to refer to things or people. And I remember years back, me using, sort of like sparingly, or actually generously, the word crazy or insane to refer to things. This is crazy, that's insane. And until somebody called me out, somebody said, you're using ableist language to describe things that are not crazy or insane. You should use other words. And I was like, first of all, I was taken aback by that comment. And I started doing research about the way I was using words like, blind to something, or or being crazy, or something being crazy, or something being insane. And I realized, wow, words matter much more than I thought they matter to the communities of people that I didn't account for when I was using those words. And I'm using this as an example of something very, very, very tiny that most of us continue to do in the workplace, calling things crazy, calling things insane, which is in itself a stigma for mental health, because people that may be dealing with a depression or a stress or anxiety may think they are going to think that I am crazy or insane if I ever say that I am dealing with this with stress or anxiety, and that I am seeing a therapist, or that I may need medication to help me out, right? So in that journey of change and transformation, what would you do first? What would you change first? I just talked about changing words, just small things. What would you do first in the workplace to break the stigma, to go through the journey of, all right, now let's embrace a culture where we are accepting people with maybe the very things that they are struggling with or going through. Anybody, please just go ahead. And I'm asking this question because I want HR folks listening to this call to have an idea of what they could do right now to improve the way their workplaces kind of embrace all things mental health. Taylor, please go ahead. I see you unmuting yourself.
Yeah, and I'll be quick because I know we just have a few minutes. So I will give 2 points. One, my journey. When I worked at a startup, I was working 12 to 16-hour days, nearly 7 days a week for a few months on end. And this was in my early 20s. So you had that sense of invincibility that comes along with being at that age. But eventually, that intensity that was becoming a norm to me, my body's ability to actually cope with that just ended. My mind was overridden by my body, and it was just, we can no longer tolerate this. And I ended up finding myself in the emergency room, or the A&E for our international audience here, of exhausted. And I had the symptoms, the palpitations, things like that, that were terrifying to be a part of, and something I never wanted to replicate again in my career. And how I learned from that moment is to, one, recognize that the soft side of HR doesn't have to be exclusive from driving high quality, exceptional results from the business. They can go hand in hand. And when I've advocated for that in the business, I also provide context to members of my own team of, if you see me doing crunch time for an occasional project, please know that I'm not doing this all the time. I'm offsetting this with time off, or I'm offsetting this with some other flexibility. If you see me respond to an email on the weekend, it's so that I can pick up my daughter from daycare on Fridays. And so I'm balancing that flexibility out. You need to provide that context to your team, or they may feel that, oh, this person is working all the time, and so I need to replicate that. You are the best example in your business to set the tone while still driving exceptional results for the business. Those do not have to be mutually exclusive. And I would encourage all of you to learn from my mistake. And then, Enrique, you saw my post last night on LinkedIn. I shared a story of my best friend that I had lost to mental health. He had committed suicide, and I found out a few years ago. I hope none of you ever get that call, but recognize it's not about fixing everyone's problems, because that you may not be able to do, but you can be there for people.
Thank you, Taylor. I really appreciate that. Justine, do you want to go next? Now we're moving. Let's move clockwise from Taylor, and you're gonna go second, so that we don't leave you last, man. Again.
No, that's fine. No, I appreciate it. Very, very well said, Taylor. And by the way, as a fellow panelist, thanks so much for sharing your stories. I think the storytelling really adds an extra bit of power in terms of trying to the discussion we're trying to have here. The thing I would say is, to any of the men who may be listening, who may be going through their own challenges. I say this to employees all the time. You're no good to no one if you're not good to yourself. Right. I had a young lady who had just she had just became a mother. And again, balancing family and work responsibilities and things like that, and she found herself just kind of stretching it all in, and she had to take some time. And I had to tell her, I said, look, you gotta give yourself time to be okay. It's okay to say that you're not okay, and it's okay for you to say that you're not at a 10 level, because you're trying to be there to support your family. You're trying to be there to be that provider, whether you are the mom or the dad or whatever. But you're no good to anyone if you're burning on both ends all the time. And the same thing goes for men. Sometimes men, we think that that's not the case. There's a lot of Instagram videos out there. I don't know if you guys have seen them, where there's these guys who just basically say like, am I okay? No, but the world doesn't care, because I'm a guy. Yeah, it sounds good on, some of these talk shows, but in real life, does the world care that as a man, I'm not at my best, or I'm not feeling well about myself? And that's how a lot of men feel. And so what I would basically say is, number one, if you are a guy who's going through that, know that at least two or three gentlemen on this call right now have been through it, and we know it, and we can personally attest that it's worth the time to invest in your own mental health, not just going to the gym. And and if you have a buddy, if you have a friend that that you think is going through, yeah, it's okay to take them to a drink to get their mind off of things, but that's not the solution. Sometimes just taking them to a quiet space to say, hey man, are you good? And that can work at the workplace too. Just that one question, and you'd be surprised how many men would just say, you know what, man, I'm not good. And then just having that opening provides a lot of value to folks who may be struggling in their own journey to deal with their own mental health. So, there's things out there, but for the rest of my HR folks, I would say, normalize it. Start having those conversations. Take the mysticism out of it. Take it out. The more you talk about something, and the more it becomes more of your daily dialogue at your organizations, the less of a fear grip it has over us to have this conversation. And I would say, put policies in place, put affinity groups. I love what May said about the man cave. That is awesome. Just because of the name of the place, I'd show up. But I would, but having a safe space for guys can say, you know what, I think, don't let the suit fool you. I don't have it all together. So I think that's the way for us, for us to approach it when we talk about tactical actions we can take for this.
Thank you, Giussani. I appreciate that. Nicole, May, Rance, since we have just a little bit of time, maybe one or two insights about where to begin this journey of transformation in the workplace to build more openness towards mental health, particularly towards men's mental health.
Okay, I think like
Nicole, do you want to go ahead?
yeah, sorry. I think like two things. I think number one, and I've been advocating for this for years. When we ask people, "How are you?" Like it's usually like a greeting, "Hey, how are you?" And then before like the person can answer, you start walking away already, or you don't even like look that person in the eye. And like that sincerity, are you really like concerned with how I am doing today? So I think like when we do ask, "How are you?" you actually listen to the person, and then you don't you can stop settling with like when they say, "I'm okay." Oh, and then like maybe ask another question, like, "What did you do during the weekend? Like how's work been going?" So like this allows people to open up, and then they also feel that safety that, okay, like someone actually cares with what I feel and with what I think. So I think that simple question, but also changing how you mean it and how you communicate that to people can do wonders already. And I think like second quick point is that when men would tell you about what they are feeling, sometimes they would, when they say it, they would say like, "I'm sorry, I'm probably just being dramatic," or you're probably thinking that I'm like crazy for saying these things or for ranting. When they say that, you have to affirm them that, hey, like you don't have to say sorry for feeling that way. You're allowed to feel that. It's okay for us not to be at our 100% all the time. I don't know what you are going through. And like, but I'm here to listen, and I'm here with you if you need anything or any support. And I think those little actions can really do a lot of wonders in how we change and make an impact towards how we see mental health, the mental health of men and how it's dealt
Yeah.
with.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate that. May Renzi, very briefly as we get ready to transition to the next panel. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Great discussions from the panelists. What I can say, even HR doctors don't know how to treat themselves, so it's an element of how do you vent, where do you talk to. But my quick one, I would say it's okay to breathe, it's okay to cry, but it's okay to reach out. Sometimes you don't normalize this because of how we'll be judged. And at the end of the day, as a HR person, I would ask myself, who reached out to me and what did I do about it? Did I find a solution or did I make the person worse? So at the end of the day, it's a journey. You take each day at a time. And at the end of what comes mostly into you is how self-aware are you about your feelings? How do you show up? And whom do you talk to? And whom do you trust to? But it's okay to cry. It's normal and it's human and it's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, May. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Last but not least,
Yeah,
Renzi.
and this is the message to all the men out there. Like, strength isn't just about how much you can handle and fit everything in one day. Strength is also about being able to ask help when you need one. And if you're scared of asking for help on your own, bring a friend with you. Ask someone you're comfortable with, because the true meaning of strength is being able to ask for help. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Taylor, Jasani, Nicole, May, Renzi, thank you so much for sharing all these wonderful insights about breaking stigma around men's mental health in the workplace. I appreciate you all, and I'm going to let you go now so that I can move our next panel right up to the stage. So thank you so much. You all have a wonderful day. Please continue taking care of yourselves. Thank you so much, everybody. So I'm going to remove you now from the screen and get ready to welcome our next panel. And last panel is going to be a 25-minute conversation. As I mentioned before, everybody, we're having very quick conversations today, which is kind of unlike us in Hacking HR. Everything lasts an hour in what we do, but this time everything lasts 25 minutes. Just wanted to cram in as many conversations as possible in a couple of hours today and tomorrow about men's mental health, knowing that this is Movember, the month of Movember, Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And yesterday, Sunday, November the 19th, it was International Men's Day, which for me pretty much means an urgent call to action around men's mental health. So let me welcome our next panelist right now to the screen. Hello, everybody. Rita, we don't see your screen or your camera. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is for you. So I appreciate you, joining us in this conversation, in this next session of this conversation of Movember. And this time we're going to be talking about beyond the brave face, understanding anxiety in men. And by the way, a lot of the conversations we've had in the past hour and a half have been very general, not just about men, by the way. So feel free, if you wanted to do so, to expand beyond just men's mental health. But I want to ask you to please introduce yourself. So if you can say to our audience a little bit more about you, what you do. And I want to ask you this, sort of to kick off our conversation. How can we build a workplace of understanding when it comes to anxiety and treatment of anxiety, and particularly for men? And I ask you this question because, well, most of us probably have dealt with anxiety ourselves or with other people in the workplace. But it seems, and it's not just that it seems, it's actually data proven and evidence based, that we want men to be on top of a game that is unsustainable, on top of a number of hours a week, on top of performance, on top of productivity that is just unsustainable. And that creates a lot of anxiety that very often goes untreated, simply because we're expecting certain behaviors from men and we're not allowing them perhaps to even say, I can't deal with this. This is too much for me. I'm struggling, or ask for help. So how can we build a workplace that is more open to understanding that people go through anxiety and it's okay to ask for help? So question for everybody, please introduce yourselves together with responding to this question, and then we're off to a great start. So anybody, please just go ahead and we take it from there.
Hey, Enrique.
Richard. Yeah, hi. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Richard Bertner. I'm the Senior Director of Compensation with Edward Jones. I would say, as an individual that suffered from anxiety as well until I got treatment several years ago, the stigma was, look, if you admit to it, you're not really, that strong. It wasn't something you wanted to admit to. It was the push for all-nighters. It was the push for travel. It was the push for maintaining anything and everything that you could during that time. And there was also stigmas associated with it, right? If you admit that you have anxiety, does that impact your benefits? Does that impact insurance if you wanted life insurance? Nobody really wanted to admit to that. And I'll be honest, if it wasn't for the support of my family, I probably wouldn't have sought treatment because, again, there was just a bad stigma around it. And I think what we've seen companies do with the pandemic coming on is embrace that in terms of really kind of pushing forward on mental health and well-being as well. So I think even myself now, I'm very candid with individuals about my journey. So hopefully maybe it helps somebody else.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Rachel. And you're actually making me think about the previous panel when we were talking about a stigma. One of the stigma that we see in the workplace is that if you say that you're struggling with something or that you have anxiety, then you are not the top performer that deserves that top performance or that promotion, right? Or maybe you shouldn't even be there because maybe you're not the person that we were looking for, right? Instead of looking at the causes that are root causes that are, causing that anxiety in you or in whoever else may be in that role. So thank you so much for that. And we're going to dig.
Thanks.
Yeah, we're going to dig a little deeper into that. Thank you, Richard. Jeff, we go next with you.
I appreciate you calling me next because Richard inspired an idea in me. I'm the Senior Director of Organizational Effectiveness at Adobe. And about 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and obsessive compulsive tendencies. And in my family, that means that you look for, okay, what pill do I take to make it go away? And not really thinking about, how it might change behavior. And when I think about the work environment, I saw a study a few months back that said 68% of CEOs were concerned that if they expressed more vulnerability, if they expressed more empathy, that they would be seen as less credible. Yeah. And I came forward in my company. I was part of a panel on anxiety in the midst of the pandemic. So, Richard, I appreciate you bringing that up because I do think the silver lining of COVID is that it created a more compassionate work environment. It created the opportunities to talk more about burnout and things of that nature. My concern is, are we going to see a rubber band effect where now we're going to go back to where it was before? Or are we going to take these insights that we've learned from this and apply them so that the workplace is different moving forward?
Oh, I appreciate that, Jeff. And thank you for sharing your own story. And hopefully we don't go back to the way things were before, right? Even though it's looking awfully similar, to some of the things that we had before the pandemic in the way we're talking about, the return to the office or, productivity and performance. And I am really hoping that we can defeat the previous normal or the status quo and we continue moving forward as we did as silver lining from the pandemic. So thank you, Jeff. Rita, we go with you now.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for having me in this panel. I'm chief of HR at Lucky Foundation as advisory board and head of HR and administration at IATSE Training Trust Fund. What Jeff and Richard mentioned, COVID taught us a lot. As a human resources myself in the healthcare industry, it's a time that I do not want to go back, but I know we learned a lot. And now as a human resources, what I see is stigma is that we always refer back, during COVID was crazy time. So as if that it was a point that we were there and it was crazy, but we want to move away. We don't want to talk about it. I don't see us talking about personally and professionally, what we learned that we could apply these days. And mental health is one of them. For an employee, regardless of the position, if somebody wants to talk about I'm vulnerable, or I'm not okay, immediately the mind goes, are they fit for the position? Are they fit for our culture? We are very fast-paced, stressful culture. Can this person do the job? And for HR translates to see, oh boy, they're going to go on stress leave. Are they going on stress leave? And what are we going to do? And especially if it's a higher position, CEOs, senior directors, VPs, it makes it more challenging. Then what are we going to do with the team? So for that reason, a lot of executives and directors and VPs, they do not talk about that they're not okay. And I hope that will change one day, and it will be okay to talk about we're not okay, and we're not talking about a risk. Because if it's a risk translates to not being okay at work, then we're trying to avoid the risk and legal ramifications. So senior directors and above stop talking about if they're not okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Rita. And I know it's out of the scope of this conversation, which what I'm going to say, which can take us, in an entire different direction. But the question is, we're talking about anxiety, right? And we're talking about how to break the stigma, in this case, around anxiety. But the reality is that there's got to be a cause that is causing that anxiety. And generally, that's the way the work is designed and the way jobs are designed. And, we should talk about this. It's out of the scope of this conversation, but we should talk about that, right? Because, if the job design and your work is breaking you, and the response of your job is, well, you may not be the right person for this role, we're going to look for somebody else. That somebody else is going to be broken down or two, right? Because it's not the person necessarily. Maybe there are some people that have more of a capacity to sustain for longer, working, 80 hours a week. But at some point, you're going to break them down, and then you're going to have to answer or look into answers inside, saying, is it the person that was not right for this role, or is it that the role is ill-designed? And we have to do something about this. But again, we can go in a whole different direction if we get there. So hopefully we get to talk about, how to kind of create a workplace where we focus on mental health and, in this case, anxiety. Paco, please go ahead.
Hello, good to see you again, Enrique, and good
Hello.
to see you all. So Paco Farias, I'm people and culture advisor for small companies in average, and I've been leading people and culture for large, medium, and small companies for a couple of decades, but very, very passionate about this topic. And in reality, I since I was a little kid, I was diagnosed with ADHD. So I know I just need more geese, I guess. I know where to add more geese into a diagnosis, but nervous tics and all that other stuff that happens, and where anxiety attacks or panic attacks and all those things. And I just didn't know what I didn't know, given that at least where I grew up in Mexico, there was a big stigma to talk about any of those things. And also probably some medical inadequacy to go through it. So I did go, my poor mom, she had to take to all sorts of crazy things to try to get me out of it. And one day, probably I'll write a book about that. But anyways, I think on the workspace, it's just fascinating for us on the people front or on the business front. We just don't talk about it, as all of you have said, and thank God for the pandemic, because now we're opening up. But even though there has been an explosion of mental health benefits in different companies, it's just fascinating because it's still kind of that place where you throw everything that you don't want to talk about, which is like, oh, go and talk to your EAP or go and talk to that whatever mental health provider, and you group all of those things because nobody wants to touch the hot potato. Nobody. I've been part of that too, and it's just because there's just not a culture of opening the discussion. Yes, there's also a little bit of an unfortunate weaponization of individuals that are abusing the system by claiming that they have mental health problems. So that doesn't help. But having said that, in reality, a lot of countries and a lot of individuals, given their cultural background or many other things, don't even talk about these things with their family. So if they don't do those things, there's all of these misdiagnosed and all of these other things that are happening. On top of this work hard hustle culture that is going on in a lot of different companies, where they tell you, it is what it is. We're going to pay you, but you're going to work like a crazy person, and that's the way it is. Pick it or leave it. Why does it have to be that way? Why? Now, we could talk hours about this, but I do believe that there's opportunity for us to have broader discussion on how to balance things out a little bit more. It could be from opening up the dialogue for individuals to understand that they might have a biochemistry issue, and that it might be okay for them to take a pill, or natural or whatever they want, but something to help them alleviate those things. If not, just look at the panic attacks, anxiety attacks, heart attacks, or whatever attack you want to see everywhere in the workplace. Nobody talks about it, but it's still there. So lots of things to work on.
Yeah, thank you, Paco, for that. And I actually want to ask. I know that I wanted to touch on this very tangentially, but some of you mentioned this before, which is, if you actually say that you have anxiety for, say, your workload. Maybe it's a lot of different things, but you're saying to your manager, I have anxiety, or I am suffering from depression, or I'm seeing a therapist because of my workload is negatively impacting me. Of course, unless that manager is truly open-minded to understand that your condition doesn't remove your value as an employee, doesn't remove your worth. If that person is not equipped with the tools to understand that, the immediate path would be, I don't think you should be doing this work then, or I was thinking about you for a promotion, but I don't think that's right anymore. So the question becomes, what can we do, knowing that changing work itself will take us, a long, long time? What can we do to equip people in the workplace, particularly direct managers, to understand that suffering from one of these conditions, whether it is depression, anxiety, or the many others that you talked about before, or you're dealing with, some personal stuff or work stuff, but if you ever bring this up to your manager, knowing that doesn't mean that you can't get the work done, that it's just that maybe you are, you're needing some extra help, or maybe you just need to take a break, or, some time off, or whatever it is, but that doesn't reduce your worth as an employee in that team. How can we create those kinds of conversations? How can we equip those managers to understand this? And from now on, anybody, please just go ahead if you want to add something to an answer to these questions.
I'd love to chime in here, Enrique.
Yeah.
There's a couple of thoughts that come to mind. And the first is that many of us who have this struggle would be considered high functioning, meaning that people would never have an idea that we have this issue. If you take any survey of people's greatest fears, typically it's going to be public speaking. And yet I'm a trainer, facilitator, and coach for a living who has anxiety. So that doesn't make sense. It's a dichotomy. So sometimes it feels as though when you talk about anxiety, it comes across as an excuse that, well, clearly you're not demonstrating any of what I think anxiety is about. So it must not be true. The other thing that I want to put out there is that I recognize very strongly that I'm operating from a place of privilege. I am in a senior role in an excellent company, and a company that enables me to talk about these things. And I'm in a place in my career where if I was working for some place that did not create this culture, I could find something else. A lot of people don't have those options. Mm-hmm. And I'm really concerned about those folks who are earlier in their career, still trying to establish that credibility, and it's less safe for them. So in some cases, I would say, yes, I can go to my manager, and I have that privilege. I have that benefit that I can go to my manager. I can talk about this with my colleagues because of who I am, where I am, and the company I work for. For those who don't have that option, they have to, and I hate to say this, they may have to keep this hidden and find other support mechanisms in family and friends, in the employee assistance program and whatnot, but they need to assess the safety of their environment to make sure that it won't get in their way.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully we're building workplaces that allow people to be safe and feel safe at whatever point in their career they are, right? Whether they're beginning or they are mid or senior level. But the reality is that I agree with you, Jeff. I think it's, it's, I don't want to say impossible, but probably close to impossible to think that all workplaces would ever behave this way, right? That they would ever be open to people just, showing up with their own vulnerabilities, whether it is anxiety or whatever else it may be. So,
and to that point, we never stop trying. And you said
yeah,
the right word.
absolutely.
It's safe. How do we create a safe environment? How do we create an inclusive environment for folks, beyond anxiety? Because everybody has their own baggage they want to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. And Richard, I know you wanted to add something.
Yeah, just very similar to what Jeff mentioned. It's creating that safe space for all of our associates, colleagues, employees, et cetera. Even in skip levels, right? Reaching out to individuals, really trying to understand kind of the trials or tribulations. The thing that I always say is you don't know what somebody's going through until you've walked a mile in their shoes. And I am honestly blessed in terms of a leader that I had recently in my last organization that just led with empathy and understanding and really got to know me as an individual, but also was able to kind of extract the performance from me without adding that kind of undue pressure of, well, you have anxiety or you have depression, this is going to be us to pause to think about what's the next move for you at the end of the day. She really got the best for me. And I think for us as leaders, we have to pay that forward or pay that back to our associates, to our colleagues, et cetera, is if you've been afforded that grace and that empathy, we need to be able to do that as well for everybody that's around us.
Yeah. What's interesting actually is that there's no dichotomy in thinking that by caring for people and their anxiety and their mental health issues, that you are decreasing in any way the performance or the quality of your leadership abilities or your team's delivery of services, products, whatever it is. In fact, it is quite the opposite, right? If you do
Exactly.
that, what you're actually saying is, trust me, here you can be safe. And as you are safe, I know I'm creating the conditions now for you to be even more productive than you were before. Not necessarily removing the anxiety. I may not be able to do that, but just by being safe, just by knowing that there's kindness in this team, that you have a leader that cares for you, just by doing those things, I already created the right conditions for you to be more productive, to do better in the team, right? Which is why sometimes I don't understand why we think that being empathetic or being kind or being compassionate or creating safe spaces is in any way seen as either a weakness or as an ineffective leader, right? When it's totally the opposite.
Creates followership, honestly.
Yeah.
When you think about it at the end of the day.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Paco, and then we go with Rita.
I'll go quick. This reminds me, let's go into vulnerability mode here. We have to start with ourselves too, right? Yeah. So in one of the companies that I was working for, I heard about, as an HR person, I heard about a specific employee that had a drinking problem. And that I'll be absolutely honest, I had no idea how to treat it. And I sent that person into the EAP because I was part of, I don't know how to deal with this. So I have been part of that. I admit it. Having said that, later on, going into an empathy journey and understanding more, rather than only doing that, which is good because hopefully that provided some treatment and some support, I started getting curious and understanding what treatment options are there and how to be a better listener or a better advocate or understand how to support their manager as they're going through it, or blah, blah, blah. So just get curious. And we're not perfect. It's very difficult to lead with these cases. Just be curious, be open, ask when you don't know, and just practice more empathy.
Yeah. Yeah, and give people a space, by the way. That's also very important, right? Because sometimes we see that there's something, we see the signs, and we know, without being professionals, we know that there's something off with somebody who may have been bubbly all the time, and suddenly, no, maybe not suddenly, maybe over time, but maybe one day we notice, hey, this person is not as bubbly as he or she used to be, right? And we just ask, what's going on. Maybe we offer help, and we got to understand that some people may say, I thank you, but no. I don't want to be asked these questions. I don't want to be helped by by you right now. Maybe that person is getting help from somebody else, but that's part of building that culture of kindness and compassion, understanding that sometimes people put up their boundaries, and we just have to respect those boundaries. So thank you for that, Paco. Rita, did you want to add anything here?
Sure. Thank you. Great points, everyone. What I noticed is that what we had in common during pandemic was the pandemic. We all were going through it, right? So I noticed that a lot of stress management, how to deal with this, how to reach out with an employee. There are a lot of training and compassion and empathy were going around. I remember that. I don't remember that now. There's no pandemic kind of. Now there's an after pandemic, and then how get we get to our norm? The norm for us, it was before pandemic. That's what I feel it. And I think we lost track of stress management. We lost track of, like, stress still exists in the organization. Mental health still exists in the organization. And if we have something in common, for example, I'll give you an example. If somebody loses a parent, and if a manager lost a parent as an adult, you show that, you see that compassion. Same thing goes if you lose a pet and a colleague or a manager lost a pet, or vice versa, or somebody may committed a suicide and the family member or lost a law enforcement or soldier. So often we only relate if we experience that crisis, if we've been through, if we have a family individual who've been through. So it's really hard to expect every manager to experience everything and connect. So I think we're lacking that training, that how to be kind and be compassionate. And I may not experience all of the above, for example, which often I sometimes feel that I've been blessed because I experienced a lot of things that I mentioned, the list earlier. But if we practice listening, if we practice creating an environment that it's non-judgmental, and people can talk freely to one another, or maybe they have that to-go person, and I hope that to-go person is the manager, and that will be a safe environment. I think it's a win-win for everyone. And as Jeff mentioned, often you do not have that in a culture, because that could be the culture of the organization, the profession and the job would do. For example, it will be hard for a police officer, for example, to go, or surgeon go to the office every day and talk about mental health, because then you're going to talk about, are they going to perform the surgery, the way they're supposed to go to do? So it's really tough for certain position, professions and environment. But I think we have to look into that as well, and not to refer to past pandemic, pre-pandemic. Just talk about what's norm for us, not the norm to go prior to pandemic. That's my experience and feeling I have since 2020 until now.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you so much for that. And I just can't believe that the time is up now. And we only covered like 2 questions and a half, by the way. I want to be mindful of your time and respectful of your schedule, of course. Richard, Paco, Rita, Jeff, thank you so much for being here with me, with our community today, celebrating, acknowledging mental health, Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and sharing some insights. I know for everybody who's tuning in right now, we're just scratching the surface. There's a lot to talk about in here, but I think the connecting line or thread among all the conversations we've had today is that, first of all, there's always something that we can do, and second, we don't have to go grandiose with magnificent changes in the workplace, which would be awesome, but because we can't do that, let's start somewhere, even if it's just asking our male, and anybody but our male colleagues, how's everything going? Do you need help? I'm here for you. Just providing that shoulder to lean on would be a good start. So once again, Paco, Rachel, Jeff, Rita, thank you so much for being here with me today and the community, and everybody. I'll see you tomorrow for part number 2. 4 more quick conversations about this, and hopefully we can improve mental health in the workplace as we continue to have this sort of conversations. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.